For this module, I'll be using a project for a real website, just as a break from creating so many new projects from scratch. It's an ASP.NET MVC site that I built for my own domain. Using this project, I want to show you some of the new features in Visual Studio, including Browser Link. And to demonstrate Browser Link, I'll bring Visual Studio over to the left-hand side of the screen with Windows left arrow. And then I'll run the site with Control F5. It will appear just in Chrome for right now. But the idea behind Browser Link is this. Let's say that I want to try some changes in the CSS file for my site. And I could be making any changes. I could be making changes to markup. But I'll do something simple here, which is let's make the color a little more drastic and see what that looks like. Typically, I'd have to go over to Chrome and hit the refresh button, but now I can just come to Browser Link, which is this button just beside the split button where you can select your default browser. This is Browser Link. You can see that it knows one browser is connected, that's Chrome. Hitting that button will refresh the browser. And even better, there's a keyboard shortcut for Browser Link, where if I just hit Control-Alt-Enter, I can refresh all linked browsers. So if I make another change here, a different type of extreme color, I can just hit Control-S to save, Control-Alt-Enter, and that refreshes the browser. And as I said, it can work across multiple browsers. As long as you're hitting localhost, a development web server, and you have debug equals true in your web.config, that's in the compilation section of web.config, typically not something that you want to put into production, only for development. When all of those criteria are met, then you can have multiple browsers refreshing. So first, Internet Explorer has to go to the site. I'm going to do a hard refresh to make sure it has the latest changes. But just going to the site, it should now be hooked up with Browser Link. So if I make one more change to the color, I should be able to hit Control-Alt-Enter, and all my browsers refresh. That's very effective when you're working in a multi-monitor setup, and you're not constrained to 1024 pixels like we are here. It's also very effective when you set your default browser to multiple web browsers. So I want to select Google Chrome and Internet Explorer, set them both as my default, so that whenever I run a web application, I will now have multiple browsers running. So Control F5, and I get a new instance of IE and a new tab in Chrome. And if I look at Browser Link, which has not quite enough space to display, I can see there's now 4 browsers connected. If I change this back to something a little more reasonable and hit Control-Alt-Enter, Browser Link will go out and force all those browsers to refresh. The other thing to look at with Browser Link is that there is a dashboard. This dashboard can tell you what browsers are connected, what page they're pointing to. If you make a change in a different page than what the browser is on, Browser Link won't send the browser over to that new page. It's only going to refresh the existing page. So occasionally you might have to do some navigation in all these individual browsers. But it doesn't matter if you're changing code in building or changing CSS or JavaScript or markup. If you tell Browser Link to refresh, it will force all those browsers to refresh on the existing URL that they're sitting on. And the Browser Link API itself is extensible, so we might expect to see some more commands inside of the Browser Link dashboard. In fact, we're going to see some more later when we look at Web Essentials for Visual Studio. For right now, if you're curious, a lot of people wonder how this works. If you view the page source for a browser that is hooked up with Browser Link and come to the very bottom of the page, you'll notice right before the closing body tag, there is a script. And the script is a Browser Link script. Visual Studio and the development server are in collusion to get the script injected into a page when you're running in debug mode against localhost. It will send this down to the browser. And this script, if we open it up and do a search, we'll see that the underlying technology here is SignalR, which, as we talked about in the last module, can use WebSockets to establish two-way communication between two parties, between the browser and some other party. In this case, the ultimate destination is going to be Visual Studio. So now there's a conduit, a live communication channel between Visual Studio and the browser. All sorts of interesting things can happen there. Right now, by default, out of the box, you get this refresh functionality. And as I close browser instances, you'll notice that we become disconnected from Browser Link. And that is Browser Link. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool when you're iterating on a UI design.